Namaste everyone. Welcome to Bharatiya Vichar Manch. I am Neeraj Kashalkar. Today, Sinu Joseph ji is our guest. Welcome, Sinu Joseph ji. Sinu ji will be giving us a lecture on science behind Hindu temples. That is today's topic.
Sinu Joseph ji is a menstrual educator for the last 10 years. 2009 to 2013, she worked with Youth for Seva. Most of us know Venkatesh Murthy ji, who was here National Sahakaravaha of HSS. He started Youth for Seva in Bangalore initially, and then now it is in 20 plus different cities. Sinu Joseph ji is engineer by training, and she has worked in the social space since her education. Youth for Seva is her first foray into social space. She has co-founded a trust called Mythri Trust, which is involved in educating adolescent girls about menstrual hygiene. Initially, the work started in villages around Bangalore. Now it has spawned to many different states, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, etc. She is also working with Adarsha Grama Vikasa Trust, which is engaged in rural upliftment. And currently they started work in 20 different villages in Karnataka, and this work also has been extended to many other villages in other states. Sinu ji, has written a book on Sabarimala. Most of us know Sabarimala incident where somebody had gone to court for allowing the entry of women into Sabarimala, and Supreme Court gave judgment in 2019. She has a book in the works on science behind Indian temples, and today's talk is going to be on that particular topic.
It's not replicable. What that means is the same experiment that happened, if you repeat it, the answers are going to be different. So for 70% of the modern medical research that exists, it could very well be erroneous. And yet, we all, when we hear science, we only think of clinical trials and experiments and research as per the framework of modern medicine, because there is no alternative that exists. Which brings me to how did India, or rather ancient India, understand science? Did they go about doing clinical trials and research? All that is written in the Shastras. How did they arrive at it? How did they know it? And can we employ some of those methods when we look at, study, or even read Indian sciences and Indian knowledge systems? Very quickly, when we say science in ancient India, I want to tell you what were the means that were employed by our ancestors to validate and arrive at the truth. When we talk about Indian science, very rarely do we talk about our systems of philosophy, which we call as Darshanas. So there are 6 primary Darshana texts. We call it Shad Darshana. There is Sankhya Darshana. There is Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. There is Nyaya. There is Vaisheshika. There is Mimamsa, and there is Vedanta. Vedanta, many of us are familiar with, but not really the rest. But the rest of them, especially Sankhya and Nyaya, provided the means of scientific reasoning, of logical understanding, and how you can arrive at the truth. And they did this through what we call the pramanas. Pramanas are proofs of knowledge. So in modern medicine, there is one method. Here, we have 4 methods, minimum of 4. Ayurveda added 1 more, and I'll quickly touch upon what these are. The first pramana, which is mentioned in Samkhya as well as Nyaya, is Pratyaksha pramana. Pratyaksha means that which you can know through your direct experience. And this is the easiest way of knowing something is true. Can you perceive it through your senses? If so, it is a proof of knowledge which is considered as valid as per the Darshanas, and we call it pratyaksha pramana. The second one is anumana or inference. What if the five senses are not able to detect or understand what we are experiencing? For example, the temples that I'm going to talk about in just a bit. Not everyone can sense it because it is beyond the realm of the sthula sharira or the gross physical body. And most of the Indian sciences, their expertise lied in understanding, experiencing, and doing sadhana, which will help you cultivate your sukshma sharira, that is your subtle body. Now, the knowledge of sukshma sharira is non-existent in modern medical science. So, the parameters of modern medical science cannot apply to this. So, what we have in the Darshanas, if you want to validate what you are experiencing, which is subtle phenomena, is inference or anumana. So, through anumana, we will have an idea of, even if I'm not able to perceive it, this is one way I can know. For example, the effect. There are many temples in India which are known as places where people experience healing. When you go there, you may not be able to sense it because you probably haven't worked on tuning your body to the sukshma sharira, to the sukshma level. But you will still know it by the effect it has when that particular disease or ailment has been cured. That is one way of anumana. The third one, which is mentioned in Nyaya, is upamana or comparison. For example, when we are studying a place like Sabarimala, it is a moksha dham. So I may not be able to go to Sabarimala to experience or understand or even infer it. But by comparing it with other moksha dhams, I will have a clue of how this particular place might impact the human body. So the third is upamana. The fourth and the important one is aptavachana or shabda, which means testimony from a reliable source. When we say reliable source, it could be the Vedas, the Shastras, because these have all been through these processes of pramana. Or it could be a person who's considered as an expert and someone who knows the subject. So you see, we had not one method, but 4 methods of validating the truth. We had pratyaksha, you should be able to directly perceive it. We had anumana. If you can't perceive it, you should at least be able to know it through inference. We had upamana. Can we know it through comparison? And finally, if none of this is within the human realm, then it should at least be mentioned in some of the Shastras or the Vedas or those texts, the sacred texts. Now, one interesting thing which was added, one more pramana was added by Charaka Muni, who wrote Charaka Samhita. He added yukti, which literally means common sense or rational. If you are making a statement, for example, let's say in the Sabarimala tradition, the most commonly heard argument was that Lord Swami Ayyappa is a Naishtika Brahmachari and therefore he does not want women to come near him because it will disturb his penance. This was the simple explanation provided. But it's contradictory to our cultural understanding of women, which says, Yatra naryastu pujyante ramante tatra devata. So how it is common sense, in such a case, we have to apply yukti and realize that we can't have such contradictory ideas. There is an interesting point made in Mimamsa Darshana, which says when you are trying to understand the Vedas or any other texts which are derived from it, if you come across a contradictory statement, it does not mean that the Vedas is wrong. It means that there is a gap in our understanding of it. The Vedas is not a book that writes about the obvious. So if there is something which seems repetitive or which seems that it's contradictory, it means we haven't understood it and we need to make a deeper exploration. So with this basics, I want to tell you that what we are talking about today is the science of the Sukshma Sharira, subtle anatomy, which exists in the Indian knowledge systems. Therefore, understanding, experiencing, and explaining it also should emerge from the knowledge of the Indian systems. Now let us come to the topic of Hindu temples. When we think of a temple, a Hindu temple, especially the ancient Hindu temple, and being from South India, what comes to mind for me is the absolutely stunning architecture. It's mind-boggling. You step into temples like Madurai Meenakshi and you're just looking around, and it's not enough. Your eyes feel that it is not enough. You want to see and absorb everything and all at once. But this architectural understanding of a temple can sometimes be a bit of a distraction. I'd like to give you one example of it. So one of the villages where I work, as in the introduction they said, the work of Adarsh Gram Vikasa. This village is close to the border of Karnataka and Andhra, and there is a well-known temple there, an ancient temple, somewhere built around the 16th century, known as Lepakshi Temple. It is in the town of Lepakshi. So this temple is famous for its beautiful architecture, the many engravings that you will see, the beautiful paintings that are there on the ceiling. You can't stop admiring. There is so much to admire about this temple. And there is one very interesting thing, that there is one pillar that is suspended. So you can pass a piece of cloth underneath it, so that it does not touch the ground. It is just resting from the ceiling. And this pillar is said to maintain the equilibrium there. If this is disturbed, then the whole construction can be damaged. Some time ago, there was a British officer who tried to check this out and tried to push that pillar. And as a result, there were some cracks. So these are the kind of stories that we hear in temples. It's very fascinating, but it's also distracting. In fact, I sometimes feel that maybe it is made there to distract us. In a way, it is the play of Maya that takes us away from really experiencing what a temple is. So while I was there, the main deity in Lepakshi temple is Veerabhadra Swami, which is an Ugra Rupa, a fierce form of Bhagwan Shiv. So we were standing there and we were having the darshan, and the Pandit was narrating the legend and the stories behind it. But for me, the whole time, I felt very strongly that there is some feminine presence here. I could feel the presence of Devi very, very predominantly, because for me, it's a very familiar energy as a woman. If I'm in a space where there is Devi, somehow I sense it. So I kept feeling that, no, there is Veerabhadra Swami here. Why am I feeling that Devi is here? Why am I sensing that so much? So after receiving the prasadam, we went around, did the pradakshina. And when we came back, in one corner, it's really like in a hidden corner, in one pillar was this beautiful image of Durga. She's just there in almost the height of the pillow, overwhelming, and with this big smile. Her lips are painted red, and there's this big bindi on her forehead, and she's just there. I was so stunned looking at it. I just stood there for a while, and maybe because I was there, or I don't know if this Pandit does it to everyone, but he started telling me the story of how Durga happened there. This was about 2 years ago, and I don't remember the details of the story, also because I was quite overwhelmed in that moment. But what he essentially said was that after the temple was built and, Veerabhadra Swami was the main deity who was being, the puja was done for, there used to be a lady who used to come and sit there all the time. Eventually, I think a sadhu or someone recognized and said, "This is Ma Durga." And then she came in her real form. And people said, "Let's make a separate shrine for her." And she said, "No, I don't want a separate shrine for me because this belongs to Veerabhadra Swami. As a devotee, I would like to but take one pillar here. Just give me one pillar." So she occupied that pillar. She went into that pillar. And even today, Durga Ma is there in that pillar. But the Pandit said something very interesting. He said, for all who came there, it was her presence that was predominant, more than even that of the presiding deity. So this is what I mean when I say experiencing the Chaitanyam in a temple. We can look at the architecture, we can learn a great many things from the legend. There is one other way, which is that when we enter that space, how can we have a sense of who is there and what is the nature of who is there? And is there a science that can explain it? How do we go about understanding temples through the science of the Sukshma Sharira? That is what the rest of my talk will be about. Okay? So first and foremost, when did temples as we know them today happen? So according to the texts which we refer to as Agama Shastra, one of the texts that I have read, one of the works I've read, is that written by C.K. Ramachandra Rao, and he's written a 12-volume book called Agama Encyclopedia. So when I say something from Agama, it is, I have referenced it and I have taken it from that text, and you can also refer it. So in that book, he has written that in each of the yugas, the way in which the divine was understood, experienced, and invoked was different. So he says that in the Satya Yuga, the Krita Yuga, what we say, God appeared among people. They were able to perceive him, they were able to communicate with him quite easily. But as the yugas changed, the human capacity for connecting with the divine kept reducing. So when we reached the Dwapara Yuga, most of the knowledge came through the Puranas because stories needed to be told for people to understand the divine in a simpler form. But these are not ordinary stories. All the stories in the Puranas have layers and layers of understanding. And around the time of the Dwapara Yuga, what happened was worship started happening at homes. So we call that Griha Pratishta. At homes and in small groups, communities, people used to come together and start doing some of the pujas and the rituals. Then came where we are today, which we call as the Kali Yuga. In the Kali Yuga, it is said that the human capacity for experiencing the divine, for understanding the Vedas, is greatly diminished. But what to do? Somehow you have to make them know that this reality is there. So what did our ancestors do? They came up with the science of Tantra, Tantra Shastra. Agama Shastra refers to the tradition and Tantra is the technique. So today, in this day and age, if we have to understand Hinduism as a religion, the knowledge of Agama Shastra and Tantra Shastra is the tool by which we can understand it to some extent. So how is a temple built and how can it have an impact on the human physiology? Because that is what I would like to communicate. The temples are not places of architecture, or it's not a museum piece to be admired from a distance. It's a space that you can walk into and have an experience unlike any other. So what makes this possible? So again, the Agama Shastras talk about how a temple is constructed. Unlike other buildings, now many times we may think that a temple is built for Veerabhadra Swami, like in case of Lepakshi, and then his Vigraham is installed. That's not how it is. The Vigraham is first created. The idea of the Vigraham is first there and it is first made. And what is contained in it, the prana or the jiva contained in it, is considered as the Atman or the soul of the presence that is going to be there. And the temple is an outward manifestation of this presence. Or in other words, building a body for this Atman is what a temple is all about. So first, the stone sculpture becomes a Vigraham by the process, the scientific process of prana pratishtha. And understanding this, at least to have an idea of it, is crucial if we have to know what a Hindu temple is about. The prana pratishtha is what sets a Hindu temple aside from a church or a mosque or a gurudwara. Because this process, this technique is done at every stage of constructing a temple. Every corner of the building. The loose equivalent of this word in English is consecration, but unfortunately in the Western religions, consecration has come to mean symbolic. But in the Hindu aspect of religion, consecration is not symbolic. It is a science and a technique of putting prana into an object or a space. And that is what is done in a Hindu temple. Now, there are different types of Hindu temples. Temples are classified based on construction, based on the material used for construction, based on the regions where they have been constructed, based on the time periods in history where they have come up, and so on. But what I want to tell you is about the way the temples are classified based on the type of prana pratishtha that is done or not required to be done. So one type is the kind that is self-manifest. So these are temples where you don't need to do a consecration because the image is Swayam Vyakta. It was there from before. One example is if you go to Guwahati in Assam, there is the Kamakya Pitha. It is a natural shape, a natural formation, which is like the yoni. And this it does not have to be redone. It was naturally there. So you have the Swayam Vyakta type where consecration is not required. Then you have what we call as the Daivika. So these are on mountain tops or in remote places where it is believed that celestial beings set up or found or were there. And that is where it gets its Chaitanya. Then we have the temples that we are familiar with in our times, which were installed by rishis inside jungles in far areas so that those who are serious about the path of spiritual liberation can make the journey and have access to these spaces. Across South India, we have temples like this installed by Agastya Muni, installed by Parashurama. We see this in Tamil Nadu, we see this in Kerala in a great way. So these temples were meant to be in remote areas and inside forests. Today, when something like Sabarimala is there, the government talks about building a road so it's easier for devotees to go there. It's not meant to be easy because these are not places for anyone and everyone. A lot of these temples are mokshadhams. That is, places where you go when you are ready for moksha in your life. And in order to prepare for moksha, you have to make that journey. It's not about taking a car and just walking into a temple like a tourist spot. Okay? So these were also the types of temples that existed and still exist. The ones set up by the rishis. Here, if they have been lying neglected for long periods of time, then the pratishtapana, the prana pratishtha is done again, but without moving the idol, without moving the vigraham. Now they say that once a vigraham is established, it must not be moved because it could even spell ruin for the country. Why they say this is because a vigraham contains and balances a certain sukshma level of chaitanyam in that place. And moving it can disturb what is happening at the subtle level. In fact, they say that even a priest who is officiating in that space, he has to be trained for it. He has to go through a certain process and only then can he go. Which is why in many of the temples, beyond a point, devotees are not allowed. Only the main presiding pandit, only he can be there. Because anyone else who goes there will not be able to handle the Chaitanya. Now this is a word you will hear me using again and again, Chaitanyam. What I mean when I say Chaitanyam is the nature of that which is put into the Vigraham during the process of Prana Pratishtha. So you may have the same deity in multiple places, but the Chaitanyam could be different in each place. And that is because of the Sankalpam, the intention with which the Prana Pratishtha is done, which is why only the person who did the original prana pratishtha will correctly know what he put in there, because it was the sankalpam put by him. And that is why the rules and regulations that are there for a temple must not be tampered with, especially not by the common devotee, because we may not be able to experience or assess what is there to tamper it. You know, in a lot of temples in Kerala, there used to be animal sacrifice, especially for the Bhadrakali temples. But in recent times, they have changed it, and instead of animal sacrifice, they have replaced that with pumpkins and other vegetables. Even to do that, you need a Tantra expert who understands how to replace that ritual without disturbing the nature of the Chaitanyam. So what goes on there is very technical, very scientific, and known only to a few who are trained for it, which is why we are told as common men not to tamper with those rules. The other type of temple that exists is the Manushya Devalaya, those constructed by regular humans, which is what we see. Most of the recent temples are that. Now, how does a temple impact the human body? In the construction of the temple, one of the ways that is described in the Agama books is that of using an architectural drawing called the Vastu Purusha Mandala. So this is a square block which has 64 or 81 equal sized cells. And in this diagram, they show a human form, which they call as the Vastu Purusha, lying facing downwards. And along the body of the Vastu Purusha, the temple is laid out. And what parts of his body does the temple correspond to? To understand this, we need to know the science of chakras. When we talk of the Sukshma Sharira, or the subtle anatomy, there are two main sciences that the Indian knowledge systems had. One is Ayurveda. So through Ayurveda, we knew the doshas and the vayus, which control all the processes within the human body. And the other science of the Sukshma Sharira is that of chakras, which occurs in Tantra. Some people think that chakra is only exclusive to Hindus. It's not like that. If you're a human being, you have chakras in your system. It is said that there are around 108 or so chakras, but primarily we talk of 6 chakras, which are arranged along the spinal column, all the way from the lowest part in your genital organ up to the space between the eyebrows. And there is a 7th, which some say as a chakra, some say it is not. It is called the Sahasrara. What I would like to do in the rest of the session is run you through each of the temples which correspond to the chakras, and how the chakras in turn impact the human physiology. This is a very detailed topic, and the time given is barely enough to touch upon it. So don't consider this as complete knowledge. Consider it just as an introduction, and based on which I hope that those of you who are interested will do your own research and will go to these spaces to experience what you are researching. So when a temple is constructed, whether or not it is intended, the way it affects the human body is through the channel of chakras. So a temple may impact the human body through one or more chakras based on the way in which the prana pratishtha is done. The lowermost chakra, which lies just below the genitals, is called Mooladhara chakra. Mooladhara refers to the base, the foundation. Based on the path that you are in life, there are 2 broadly classified paths in the Hindu tradition. One is the Pravritti Marg, where you take the path of worldly existence, like all of us are. And the other is the Nivritti Marg, the path that is meant to take one towards moksha. This is the path which very few people take. So based on whether you are pursuing the pravritti marg or the nivritti marg, the same chakras will have a different impact on the human body. So the Mooladhara chakra. Across the villages in India, we have temples dedicated to what we call the Grama Devata, the village deity. And usually this is the Shakti, it is Devi in the form, in a very fierce form, in Ugra Rupa. For example, in Karnataka, we have the temples of Yellamma. So she is there in every village. She is the Grama Devata. And when devotees go to these temples, what is largely energized or triggered is the Mooladhara chakra. Why? Mooladhara chakra is the point from where our life starts. If it is not functioning well, it will show up as a variety of disease. The Mooladhara corresponds to the excretory organs in the human body because it is situated in that region. So when it is not functioning properly, it causes a number of ailments. Also, the Mooladhara is the place where one experiences a certain freedom from insecurity. If people are struggling for basic survival, food, shelter, and there is general fear about existence, that means the Mooladhara is not sufficiently energized. Which is why the first temple, the first place that you must go to for day-to-day maintenance of life and to be able to start the spiritual journey is the temple where Devi is consecrated or the prana pratishtha is done such that it triggers the Mooladhara chakra. The next chakra, slightly higher from the Mooladhara, located in the region of the genitals, is called Swadhisthana chakra. Swadhisthana chakra corresponds exactly with the reproductive organs, the ovaries in women and the testes in men. We have seen many temples which are examples of Swadhisthana chakra, especially when we talk of fertility, Devi who is there for fertility. So in India, every Tuesdays and Fridays are days of the Devi. And during such days, women go to these temples where mainly it is the Swadhisthana chakra that is there. I want to tell you one very interesting experience that I had of how a space where the Swadhisthana is consecrated or done in the prana pratishtha, how that can impact women's reproductive health. So there is this temple in Kerala, in Chenganur. It is the Bhagwati temple. And I went there as a menstrual researcher as part of my study because there is an interesting festival that happens here called Tiruputarat. In this festival, it is believed that Devi menstruates. And at the time when she menstruates, there is a massive celebration. And it's usually the men who are doing the celebration. And Devi is put through the same processes and rituals as that of a girl or a woman who is menstruating. So when I went to this temple, devotees started sharing with me the stories of how they keep coming back there. And the reason they said is that any woman who has a problem in her menstrual cycles or in her reproductive health or has difficulty with getting pregnant, that is basically infertility issues, they all experience a relief from those problems by going to this Bhagwati temple. And initially, like most people, I thought, well, it's faith, right? It's bhakti, and it's very nice. It's nice as it is. And I was really overwhelmed by the positive cultural understanding of menstruation that is represented in this temple. But something else happened. When I returned from this place, that month, my period did not come as expected. In fact, 13 days passed before I actually menstruated. And when my period finally came, I was made to realize that that date was closer to Amavasya. Amavasya is new moon. And in our tradition, it is understood that when women menstruate closer to or coincidence with Amavasya, it indicates a better reproductive health. Normally, I am not someone who experiences intense period pain, but even then, that particular month when I got my period, it was so much more smoother and easier than the other months. That's when I understood that what we talk about these places, it is not mere symbolism. It is not just legends and stories. These places have an actual impact on your physical health, and women, especially women, can experience this because the way in which their menstrual cycles will be altered to come in sync with nature's cycles. So this is about the Swadhisthana chakra. The third chakra from below is called the Manipura chakra, and this is located in the region of the navel. Manipura chakra, for one who is pursuing the worldly path or the Pravritti mark, it triggers ambition, it triggers material success and wealth and prosperity. You know, all those things which we feel are necessary for day-to-day living. It's success. Manipura chakra, when it is triggered, it puts you in the path of success. But in the spiritual path, for one pursuing the Nivritti mark, Manipura chakra is the place where your transition to the realm of moksha begins to happen. Because when you go to these places, it puts in you a sense of vairagya, of detachment from worldly life. It is so interesting because that same chakra can have two very different effects based on the path that you are pursuing and based on the way that particular temple has been done, the way the Chaitanyam is. There are two examples of this that I want to give. One is the Manipura chakra, again, how it relates to the human body. It works on the adrenal gland and the pancreas and the region in the abdomen. There is this temple in Tamil Nadu called Venni Karumbeshwar temple. It is, and Manipura chakra's presiding deity is Rudra, the fierce form of Shiva. So in this Venni Karumbeshwar temple, the story is that anyone who is suffering from diabetes, if they go there, they will experience healing. Again, you may wonder why. Because the Manipura chakra acts on the adrenal glands and the pancreas. And that could really be the reason why it has this effect. When you look at the Manipura chakra from the perspective of Nivritti, I want to give the example of the Umananda temple in Assam. Now, if one is going to visit the Kamakya Shakti Peeth in Assam, the rule says that first you must go to the Umananda temple. And Umananda is a version of Shiva. You must first go to Umananda and only go to Kamakya. And all along I was confused as to why this order exists. What is the purpose? So when I went to Umananda temple, I understood that. That temple, it is situated a little underground. And as you start descending the stairs, very powerfully, you can feel a throbbing sensation along the entire region of the solar plexus. It is not just in the navel, or it doesn't just come and go. It's just that throbbing in the entire line, almost in a vertical line. I could feel those pulsations. So much so that I felt if someone keeps their hand on my abdomen, even they can sense it, because it was like that. And it lasted till the very next day. For one who is going to Kamakya or the Shakti Peeth, she is so powerful in granting desires because she is Kameshwari. She fulfills worldly desires. That the chances of you getting carried away with that is high. To balance that aspect, you must first go to Umananda temple, which will trigger the process of moksha in you. And after that, when we go to Kamakya, even when our desires are fulfilled, we will not be so attached to it. So this is the beautiful way in which it is planned. In fact, most of the major ancient temples are not temples that operate in isolation. Based on the Chaitanyam there are rules that you must first go here, go there, go here, and then go to this space. Today, most of it is lost. We go there as tourists, we enjoy the architecture and come back. But we need to study temples more experientially. And that's when we will understand an entire new aspect of it, which is absolutely stunning. Just to experience that is completely worth it. And you cannot know this through theory alone. You must be physically present there to know this. So that's about the Manipura chakra. Really running short on time. So then we have the Anahata chakra. Very quickly, I will take you through that. Anahata chakra is located in the region of the heart, and it corresponds with the thymus gland. From the Anahata upwards, the impact of these chakras are more on the spiritual path. And that is why it is said sometimes that those who are following a worldly life, or those who are in the reproductive age, for them, it is the temples which trigger the lower chakras, the Muladhara and Swadishthana, that are more important. So that before time, you don't get carried away to the spiritual path when you're not necessary, because your body needs to do some preparation for it. So the Anahata chakra is where Kali and Durga and those forms of Devi reside. So what I experienced in Lepakshi temple was the Anahata. Very predominantly, I could feel that sensation, those pulsations in the region of the heart. And that usually happens for me when I'm in a space where there's either Durga or Kali. And I just know that, even with my eyes closed, that that is where I am. So Anahata, why there is Durga and Kali there? Because they eliminate fear. That feeling of, I don't know what will happen. That fear of identity, of sense of self, that huge ego that we attach. So Durga and Kali helps us get rid of those feelings. And when that happens, we are able to experience compassion very effortlessly. So when you go to a temple where Anahata is there, it becomes very easy for you to be nice to people. It's no more a diplomatic process, where you're thinking, I will be nice, but will I get something in return? That does not happen. You just experience that very effortlessly. As you go a layer higher, there is the Vishuddhi Chakra, which corresponds to your thyroid glands. In the spiritual realm, the Vishuddhi Chakra plays a very important role. If you've been able to come this far, and if the Vishuddhi is active in you, it does phenomenal work for you in terms of speech, in terms of articulation. For those whose Vishuddhi is active, the knowledge of the Shastras, the knowledge of the sacred texts comes to them. How? Because then knowledge does not get limited to sciences. Knowledge does not get limited to books. Knowledge becomes connecting to the source, connecting to Saraswati. When the source of knowledge gets awakened in you, then you will be able to know things beyond books. Before I started writing my book last year, I visited the Kamakya temple. And it's a fascinating temple because it is the one place where I could feel all the chakras simultaneously. And there is a reason for it, and I've written an entire chapter on that in my upcoming book. But all those feelings that I felt, it finally settled for me at the Vishuddhi Chakra. And this is where the throbbing kept happening. I was there for a period of 3 days, and all 3 days I spent at least an hour in the temple meditating. And that is where I was able to confirm that the same thing kept happening to me again and again. It happens once, you think, okay, it's just a coincidence. The second day, the third day, all sensations settled in the Vishuddhi. Many times when I speak, people ask me, who taught you? Because we all need someone to validate when somebody is speaking. But honestly, I don't know the answer to that. And which is why I say that it is her grace through which I'm able to express what I know. There is nothing else I can attribute to it. I know that it isn't me in my regular human form that is saying it. There is some Shakti that is attempting to express herself, and I'm just a channel for it. And which is how many of the things that I have written, especially about temples, how that understanding has come to me. Beyond the Vishuddhi, I will leave it at this point with just one line, that beyond the Vishuddhi is the Ajna. They say that through sadhana, you can somehow climb up to the Vishuddhi. But to go beyond this, you need the grace of a guru. Without the grace of the guru, that climb up is very difficult. And the Ajna is where moksha happens. So all the moksha dhams, the temples that are associated with moksha, primarily work on the Agnya Chakra. And most of the times, not always, but most of the times, the deity there is Shiva, because Shiva is about moksha. I will just end with one story to tell you another incident where I could experience the Chaitanyam, and it has to do with Kamakya, because that left a very lasting impression on me. For those of you who don't know, Kamakya Mandir in Guwahati, Assam, it is a Shakti Peeth where what you worship is in the shape of a yoni. There is no vigraham there of Devi, there is just the yoni that is worshipped. And every year for 4 days, soon after the summer solstice in India, that is somewhere between June 22nd to June 25th, it is believed that there is a red color water that comes from the spring, from the yoni, and below that there is a spring. So it is believed that for 4 days, Devi menstruates. And on those 4 days, the temple is closed and all businesses, all activities, farming, everything is closed in Assam at that time. Those 4 days are celebrated as a festival in Assam called Ambubachi. My first visit to Kamakya was in 2015. After that visit in 2016, in June, my period coincided exactly with Ambubachi. And I thought, well, that's nice. The next year in 2017, the same thing happened. That's when I thought 2 years cannot be a coincidence. There must be more to this. 2018, my work schedule was very hectic. My cycles were totally out of sync and it did not happen. When I started working on my book in 2019 and I started doing my sadhana again, in June, again, my period came exactly in sync with Ambubachi. I visited Kamakya temple again just after Ambubachi, and that's the experience I've written about. But this year, very unexpectedly, in June, my period came 10 days before date. I mean, that's gynecologically wrong. But it came 10 days before to start exactly on the day of Ma Kamakya's menstruation. 4 times? Can it be a coincidence? I don't think it is. The Kamakya Mandir is capable of transforming your internal processes in such a way that you come in sync with nature's cycle. You see, June is the time when we shift from Uttarayana to Dakshinayana. And this shift in the ayanas, in the solstices, reflects in women's menstrual cycles. So women in India, including me and many other women, will observe that there is a change in their period in May when the shift begins to happen. And what happens when you go to Kamakya is that you begin to start syncing with nature's cycles. So Ma Kamakya's menstruation is equated to the menstrual cycle of Mother Earth herself. And that is what starts to get reflected in your own body when you go to these spaces. So I will stop at this point. I apologize if I have taken too long, but I know I've only touched the tip of an iceberg, and I'll leave the room open now for questions. Thank you for your patience.